Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the endocrine system. The endocrine system is composed of endocrine glands and specialized cells across different areas in the body. So pag sinabi po nating specialized, this means that although they belong to the same organ system, magkakaiba po yung types of cells that can be found here, and magkakaiba din po yung functions nila. They at least have one similarity though, and that is to secrete hormones or enzymes that would be released into the blood circulation until it reaches the target organ or yung specific organ na gusto nilang impluensyahan with these hormones. Target tissues are tissues that have the receptors or a structure that would bind specifically to a certain hormone. This is why kahit po nakakalat sa blood circulation natin yung mga hormones ng magkakaibang mga endocrine glands ay hindi nila naapektuhan yung ibang organs na hindi naman nila target. Alright, so dahil kailangan magma-match muna yung receptor on the surface of the cells ng target organ with the structure of the hormone. So imagine the lock and key model. So halos lahat po ng mga padlock, di ba? Specialized yung susi para ma-open sila, di ba po? So if the key does not match the lock, it won't work. So that's the same idea with hormones and target organs. So kung hindi tugma yung structure ng isang hormone sa receptor na nasa surface ng isang cell or isang organ, hindi ito maapektuhan or hindi nito maapektuhan yung organ na yun. Kasi ayun nga po, their structures do not match. This illustration shows us the different organs that are included in the endocrine system. So ito po, ang nakikita natin dito ay gross anatomical illustration lang. So as we proceed with the discussion, we would also be introduced with the microscopic anatomy of all these endocrine system glands. Let's now talk about chemical messengers. So this one is easy to remember kapag sinabi po na autocrine para po sa sarili niya. So these cells would release chemicals and it affects themselves. It affects the same type of cells. Kapag sinabi naman po natin na paracrine chemicals are released by cells to affect nearby cells. So these cells don't have to be the same. As long as magkalapit sila, no, as it says here, close proximity, then it will work. Neurotransmitters and neuromodulators are secreted specifically by nerve cells. So yung function po nila belongs more within the nervous system. And then yung mga classified as hormones or neurohormones naman po, since nasa malalayong locations yung target cells nila, they first have to travel to the bloodstream before they reach their target tissues. So doon sa target tissues, they would find their matching receptor. Listed here are the functions of the endocrine system. Notice all the keywords that were used here. So regulate, modulate, control. So very controlling, no? Very manipulative pala si endocrine system. But yeah, that's their job though. Their job is to control the things that are happening in the body to keep things going as it should. All right, so regulate metabolism, control food intake and digestion, modulation of tissue development, and all these other things that needs to be maintained. Listed here are more of its functions. Notice the same words were used, no? Regulate, control, modulate, stimulate. So basically, if we were to make a hierarchy, no, the brain would tell the organs of the endocrine system what to do. And then the endocrine system naman po would tell all the other organs what they should be doing. Alright? So ulitin natin, kumbaga po, uutusan ng brain yung endocrine system kung aling organ yung kailangan niyang kontrolin. Tapos magtatrabaho na po yung endocrine system to control each specific organs. Now, what are the different types of hormones? Now, some hormones are water soluble, meaning they could be dissolved in water. So these are also the most common types of hormones. Karamihan daw po ng hormones na ginagawa ng endocrine system, they are water soluble. Some hormones are lipid soluble, meaning ito naman po, it needs to be in an environment kung saan may mga lipids or fat molecules para ma-dissolve sila, para ma-utilize or magamit sila ng human body. So dito po, wag kakalimutan yung mga examples that have been listed here. So for water-soluble hormones, they're usually made up of proteins, or peptides or amino acids. Pero kung lipid-soluble hormones ito, usually, no, they are the ones that are structured like a steroid or a cousineoid. Tapos, ayun nga po, listed here are the examples. On this slide, tignan po natin how hormones are released. So there are chemicals in the blood that could stimulate the release of these hormones. So yung mga chemicals daw po, yung nagiging signal sa endocrine system para mag-work. So these are referred to as humoral stimuli. Next, it says here that hormones could also be controlled by other hormones. So, for example, na-fulfill na or natapos na ng hormone na ito yung function niya at na-sense na nung brain, no, na-sense na nung endocrine system na normal na ang lahat. Another hormone would now be released to counteract the previously released hormone. So, kumbaga, magre-release ulit ng isa pang hormone yung endocrine system para pagsabihan yung naunang hormone na, oh, okay bro, ox na, tama na yan, di ba? So, ayun. Pwede rin naman pong baliktad, no? Some hormones would stimulate or encourage the release of other hormones. This slide just shows us an illustration of an example of a humoral stimuli. So first up, no, madidetect ng brain that there are low levels of blood calcium ions. So kapag nadetect ng brain yun, uutusan niya yung endocrine system natin, no, to release the parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone or PTH now would influence the action of osteoclast. And if you would remember, no, from our discussion on the skeletal system, diba? Ang trabaho po ng osteoclast is to mobilize or to move the calcium ions. So magtatrabaho yung osteoclast para i-move or i-remove yung mga calcium ions and ililipat niya ito papunta sa bloodstream, which would now increase and normalize the blood calcium ions. So as we can see right here, nagsimula po tayo sa low calcium levels, no? Kumilos yung endocrine system para mag-release ng parathyroid hormone. Yung parathyroid hormone, inimpluwensyahan niya yung mga osteoclast. Eventually, more calcium ions have been moved or released into the bloodstream. So yun po, that's what we mean, or that's one of the examples on how humoral stimuli would happen. Now, inversely, no, so sa kabaliktaran naman po, tignan natin itong next illustration. As you can see right here, what if mataas na yung blood calcium levels? Alright, so of course, madidetect ng brain na mataas na yung blood calcium levels. So, kumbaga is may impluwensyahan niya rin yung trabaho ng endocrine cells natin. Ang mangyayari, since mataas naman na yung blood calcium levels, hindi na ito magse-secrete ng parathyroid hormone. As we can see right here, no PTH secretion. So with that, no, kung wala naman pong parathyroid hormone na na-release, hindi rin magtatrabaho, no, wala rin gagawin yung mga osteoclast. Kapag walang ginawa yung mga osteoclast, wala rin calcium ions na ilalabas papunta doon sa bloodstream. So as the calcium ions are being depleted or being used up by our organ systems, eventually magde-decrease or bababa din papunta sa normal levels yung blood calcium ions. Alright? So, kumbaga parang kabaliktaran lang nung first scenario. So again, these illustrations shows us an example of humoral stimuli. Let's now talk about humoral inhibition. In simpler terms, kadalasan daw po by pair, no? By pair yung action ng mga hormones. So one of them could affect the other, and usually daw po opposites yung function ng bawat isa. Alright, so pati ba naman sa hormones, kailangan by pair. But as you can see right here, they work together to maintain homeostasis or to balance out each other. Mamaya po i-explain din natin lahat ng mga nabanggit dito like aldosterone or the atrial natriuretic peptide. Pero for now, ang kailangan lang pong tandaan is the concept or the idea of humoral inhibition. Again, when we say humoral inhibition, by pair yung pagtatrabaho ng mga hormones. No? One hormone could affect the other. And usually, they would be opposite in function to maintain homeostasis. As we can see right here, neurons or the brain also plays a major role in guiding the endocrine system on what to do. So for the most part, either ini-inhibit or ini-stimulate daw po ng brain yung endocrine organs to do their work. So if something needs to be controlled, they would stimulate the endocrine organ that is responsible. Now, kung ngayon okay na yung situation, homeostasis has been achieved, balance na lahat, the brain would also inhibit those endocrine organs. Alright, so ulitin natin, the neurons or the neurons that could be found in our brain has the capability to both stimulate and inhibit endocrine glands. We also have the terms negative feedback. Alright, so kapag sinabi po na negative feedback, it means that the hormone has the capability to inhibit itself kapag na-sense na niya na back to normal na yung condition ng human body. Alright, so again, di ba, nabanggit natin sa previous slides that the function of a lot of hormones that is being produced is to maintain balance, to produce homeostasis. So again, sa negative feedback po, kapag napansin na nung brain natin and nung endocrine system natin na homeostasis has been achieved, everything is back to normal, dun na po kikilos yung negative feedback wherein a certain hormone would inhibit itself once the blood levels have reached a certain point or a state of being balanced. Kapag sinabi naman po natin na positive feedback na-enhance or yung word na ginamit dito is na-exemplify yung activity nila. Alright? So, ayun po. Again, let's go through the keywords. Alright? So, kapag sinabing positive feedback, enhance. Kapag sinabing negative feedback, inhibit. Nasabi ko na rin po ito kaninang umpisa. A hormone can only stimulate a certain organ or a certain tissue if they have a specific receptor for them. Or yung ginawa ko nga po na example is the lock and key model. Now, kung hindi nagmamatch yung structure ng hormone sa receptor sa ibabaw ng cells, then that would not work on that cell. Next, the area on each molecule, the area on each molecule of the cell where a hormone can bind is referred to as the receptor site. Alright, so may specific na lugar lang po sa ibabaw ng cell kung saan pwedeng mag-connect or mag-attach yung hormones. And this is usually based on their shape plus yung chemical characteristics po nila. Alright, so ulitin natin, yung mga receptor sites, ito lang yung specific area kung saan pwedeng mag-attach or mag-bind yung hormones. Now, receptor sites, they're mainly the specificity that they have for certain hormones is brought about by their molecular shape and chemical characteristics or chemical structures. This slide talks more about the differences of lipid-soluble compared to water-soluble hormones. So yung mga lipid-soluble hormones po, they could easily pass through the phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane. Yung mga water-soluble hormones naman po, they can't do that. Kasi po, di ba, merong hydrophobic tails yung mga phospholipids. This illustration right here shows us target tissue specificity and response. So again, this is a very simple illustration. As we can see right here, we have a target cell for hormone 1. Asan yung hormone 1? Yung yellow na may isang pointy structure sa gitna. Yung hormone 2 naman is also right here. Siya yung color blue na may dalawang pointy structures at one side, as we can see right here in this illustration. Now, paano nangyayari yung specificity? As we can see right here in this cell, it has a receptor specific only for the shape of hormone 1. Alright? Notice, no? Notice na yung hugis po no receptor for hormone 1, it only has a slot or it only has a space para dun sa nag-iisang matalim na portion ng hormone 1. Unlike dito sa hormone 2, hindi siya magkakasya kapag dumikit siya dito kasi it has two pointed areas. So ayun po, that's a very simplified kind of like illustration showing specificity. Alright, so this happens because their shapes would fit one another. So ayun po, hindi maapektuhan nung hormone number 2 yung cell na ito kasi hindi siya makapag-bind dito sa receptor sa ibabaw nung cell. So ang magbabind lang is si hormone 1 and it will only work in accordance to the action of hormone 1. Let's now talk about the organs of the endocrine system. So dito po, mag-focus na lang po tayo dun sa mga areas that I have already highlighted. Alright? So nilagyan ko na po ng emphasis, no, yung mga parts na kailangan nating tandaan. Alright? So first up is the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland, this is located within the brain and it is controlled by the hypothalamus. Alright? Ulitin natin, nasaan ang location ng pituitary gland? Brain. Ano ang nagko-control? Anong bahagi ng brain ang magko-control sa pituitary gland? It's the hypothalamus. Now, the pituitary gland is actually divided into two regions, the anterior and posterior. Alright? So, mamaya po, pagtingin natin dun sa microscopic anatomy nila, makikita natin may difference din po in staining yung itsura ng anterior and posterior pituitary gland. This illustration right here just shows us yung gross anatomy kung nasaan yung location ng pituitary gland. Right here, it just shows us a list of the different hormones and organs that may be affected by the pituitary gland or by the action of the pituitary gland. Again, let's just focus on the highlighted parts or highlighted keywords on this slide. So first up, the anterior pituitary gland would synthesize the hormones, again, as controlled by the hypothalamus. Now, the neurons of the hypothalamus would secrete releasing hormones that would stimulate the production and secretion of a specific hormone. So basically, ang una pong kikilos or ang una magtatrabaho is yung hypothalamus para ma-stimulate niya yung pagtatrabaho ng anterior pituitary gland. Alright, so again, the hypothalamus would secrete releasing hormones. Next, we also have what is known as inhibiting hormones. Inhibiting hormones would decrease the secretion of a specific anterior pituitary hormone. So again, same concept as we've discussed earlier. Kapag na-achieve na ng endocrine system natin yung homeostasis, tsaka na magtatrabaho yung mga inhibiting hormones para bumaba na po yung secretion ng mga hormones na nanggagaling sa anterior pituitary gland. Kasi nga po, tapos na, nagawa na nila yung trabaho, na balance na nila yung mga bagay-bagay. So that previous slide talked about the anterior pituitary gland. Dito naman, let's talk about the posterior pituitary gland. So the posterior would store and release the hormones that have been produced by the neuroendocrine cells in the hypothalamus. Alright, so ulitin natin, kung kanina, yung anterior, no, it would kind of like synthesize the hormones that is needed. Sa posterior, it would store the hormones that is needed. Okay, ulitin natin. Anterior, synthesize. Posterior, store. Right? So there are two hormones that is released from the posterior pituitary gland. First up is the antidiuretic hormone or ADH and oxytocin. Okay, ulitin po natin, may dalawang hormones na nanggagaling sa posterior pituitary gland, the ADH or antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Okay, so balik muna po ulit tayo sa anterior pituitary hormones. Alright, so sa anterior pituitary, daanan muna natin sandali, no, kung ano yung mga hormones na sinesynthesize ng anterior pituitary or nanggagaling sa anterior pituitary. First up is the growth hormone. So the growth hormone, it targets almost all tissues. Kasi diba, as a person is growing or developing, halos lahat naman ng tissues natin is kailangan din na mag-grow, mag-increase in size, or mag-increase in mass. Alright? So again, mula sa anterior pituitary, it produces the growth hormone. So it stimulates the growth of bones, muscles, and all the other organs. Now, listed here are some abnormalities. So, pag too much yung GH, kapag masyado daw pong madami yung production ng growth hormone, it may cause gigantism or giantism. Alright? Gigantism or giantism. Yun po yung nangyayari kapag sobrang dami yung production ng growth hormone. Too much GH. On the other hand, if there is too little GH, masyado daw pong konti yung production ng growth hormone, this would now lead to pituitary dwarfism. Next, still on the anterior pituitary, it also produces the TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone. So as the name implies, it's very easy to remember, ang target tissue po ng thyroid stimulating hormone is the thyroid gland. Alright, so it regulates thyroid gland secretions. Again, listed here are some abnormalities. So again, kapag too much TSH or sobrang dami daw po ng production ng thyroid stimulating hormone, it would lead to the enlargement of the thyroid gland, which is generally referred to as goiter. Now, kabaliktaran lang din po nito, no? If there is too little TSH, masyado daw pong konti yung pag-produce ng thyroid stimulating hormone, then the thyroid gland would shrink or liliit po ito compared to normal size. Alright? Again, excessive TSH, goiter. Not enough TSH, shrinkage of the thyroid gland. Still on the anterior pituitary hormones, next is the gonadotropin hormone. So, kasama dito yung luteinizing hormone. Okay, ulitin natin. Anterior pituitary gland produces what are known as gonadotropin hormones. And for females, what we have is the luteinizing hormone or LH. Alright? So, ang target tissue po nito are the ovaries. So, this one would promote ovulation and progesterone production. So again, na-highlightan na po natin yung mga important keywords. Huwag pong kakalimutan itong mga to. Now, for males, meron din pong luteinizing hormone ang mga males. Pero, syempre, based on the male anatomy, iba ang target tissue nila. So for females, it's the ovaries, but for males, it's the testes. Alright, so next, with regards to the function, it is necessary for the production of sperm and aldosterone. Okay, so isegment po natin yun, ulitin natin yun. Alright, the gonadotropin hormone, under this is the luteinizing hormone. So both females and males, they have the luteinizing hormone. Pero magkaiba yung target organs. For females, the target organ or target tissue are the ovaries. For males, the target tissue are the testes. For females, dahil ovary yung target tissue, ang function niya is for ovulation. Alright? Next, for males naman po, luteinizing hormone would target the testes, and this would help with sperm production and testosterone production. Next, nasa anterior pituitary pa rin po tayo, and still under the gonadotropins, we have what is known as the follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. Alright? So again, ulitin natin, anterior pituitary gland produces gonadotropins, and isa pang type ng gonadotropin is the follicle stimulating hormone. Now, katulad ng luteinizing hormone, both females and males would have FSH. But again, magkaiba yung target tissue, magkaiba yung function. For females, FSH would target specifically yung follicles ng ovaries. So mamaya po, pag nakita natin yung slides on microscopic anatomy, malalaman natin saan ba specifically located ang follicles. But anyway, FSH would work on the follicles of the ovaries for follicle maturation and also the secretion of estrogen. Now, for males, it would target the seminiferous tubules that could be found on the testes. Alright, so basically parehas sila ng luteinizing hormone na ang target organ ay yung testes. Pero sa FSH, yung sobrang specific na area na target niya is the seminiferous tubules only. Alright? Which again, may mga slides po tayo mamaya of the microscopic anatomy of the seminiferous tubules. So again, this also helps for sperm production. Hindi pa po tapos sa anterior pituitary hormones, galing din po dito ang prolactin. Alright? So, as the name implies, prolactin. Ang target niya is yung mammary glands and it functions for milk production. Alright? Prolactin. For milk production. Again, it's still included under the anterior pituitary hormones. Next, still on the anterior pituitary hormones, pasensya na medyo madami po talaga dito, next is the melanocyte stimulating hormone, or MSH. Again, it's a bit easy to understand. As the name implies, it targets specifically the cells on the skin known as our melanocytes. And this would stimulate melanin production, or yung production ng brown pigment that could be found on our skin. Next is the adrenocorticotropic hormone, or the ACTH. Okay? The adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, ang specific target nito is the adrenal cortex. Alright? Again, the names of these specific hormones are quite easy to remember kasi nasa pangalan nila yung organ na tina-target nila. So, ulitin natin, adrenocorticotropic hormone would target the adrenal cortex. Now, this would stimulate the production of corticosteroids. Okay, so nadaanan na po natin yung mga hormones na pinoproduce ng anterior pituitary. Let's now proceed to the hormones that may be released by the posterior pituitary. Alright, so first up is the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Alright, antidiuretic hormone. So specific target organ are the kidneys, and this would lead to the conservation of water. So basically, in simpler terms, hindi daw po maiihi yung person kapag nagpo-produce ng anti-diuretic hormone yung posterior pituitary, or kapag nag-release yung posterior pituitary ng anti-diuretic hormone. Alright? Anti-diuretic against urination. Right, listed here are abnormalities, specifically diabetes insipidus. Okay, ulitin natin, magkaiba po ito dun sa condition na tinatawag na diabetes mellitus. Okay, ang diabetes mellitus po, it has something to do with our uptake or utilization of glucose. Pero dito, sa diabetes insipidus, what is happening is that there is low amounts of ADH. Alright, kakaunti lang daw po yung anti-diuretic hormone. So ano mangyayari? The kidneys would produce large amounts of dilute or watery urine. So walang pumipigil sa urination ng isang person. So hindi nakakapagtipid or hindi nakakapag-save ng water yung kidneys. Kapag may dumaan na fluids dun sa kidneys, automatically, i-release or parang they would get rid of the water that passes through, regardless kung dehydrated na ba yung person. Alright? So, kahit daw po dehydrated na yung pasyente, patuloy pa rin siyang naiihi. Kasi nga, kaunti lang yung anti-diuretic hormone. So, as you can see right here, very low amounts of ADH could lead to dehydration and thirst, which again is because patuloy na nag-urinate yung person or nagpo-produce ng urine kahit hindi naman kailangan or kahit, ayun nga, dehydrated or kulang na yung fluids within their body. Alright, so again, the anti-diuretic hormone is important for the conservation of water or for the reabsorption of water in our kidneys. Again, kapag po may problema sa amounts of the ADH, ang mangyayari is magkakaroon ng diabetes insipidus yung patient. Still on the posterior pituitary, next hormone that is being released from here is the oxytocin. So this one is also quite easy to remember. Ang target niya lang po is yung uterus, and this would increase uterine contractions during labor or childbirth. So kapag daw po ang isang pregnant woman ay manganganak na, alright, ang posterior pituitary ay magre-release ng oxytocin. Tatargetin ng oxytocin yung uterus. Ang gagawin ng uterus, magko-contract siya para matulungan na ilabas yung baby. So that was for the pituitary gland, anterior and posterior. Tapos na po tayo sa pituitary gland, both the anterior and posterior. Let's now proceed to the thyroid gland. So the thyroid gland has been described to be one of the largest glands, and it requires iodine to function. Alright, so ito rin po yung dahilan kung bakit we have what is known as the Asin law. Alright, so you could look it up. We have what is known as the Asin law, and under that is required daw po na fortified with iodine yung asin na binebenta dito sa Pilipinas. Alright, so again, ulitin natin. This is because of the requirements of the thyroid gland. Alright, the thyroid gland requires the presence of iodine to function. So, ayan po. The thyroid gland would secrete the thyroid hormone and calcitonin. So, unahin po natin yung description ng thyroid hormones. They are secreted by follicular cells. And ang target niya is almost all tissues. Alright, so this would regulate the metabolic rate needed for growth. Alright, so ayun po. Again, kapag kulang sa iodine, ang isang pasyente, maaaring hindi ito makapag-produce ng sapat na dami ng thyroid hormones, which as we can see right here, pwedeng maapektuhan yung growth ng isang pasyente. Next is calcitonin. So calcitonin is secreted by the parafollicular cells. Alright? So may highlight na po. Huwag po natin kakalimutan kung saan nanggagaling ang aling hormone. Alright? Ulitin natin. The thyroid hormones would come from the follicular cells. The calcitonin would come from the parafollicular cells. Now for this one, ang specific target nito are the bones and a few other tissues. So ang calcitonin naman po, ang gagawin niya is that it reduces blood calcium levels when there are excessive amounts or kapag mataas yung blood calcium levels. Naalala po, yung illustration na diniscuss natin kanina nung pinag-uusapan natin yung parathyroid hormone or humoral stimuli. Di ba kanina, dun sa illustration na pinakita ko, pasensya na hindi ko po may a-atras kasi matitigil yung recording. Pero kanina, dun sa illustration, kapag mababa yung blood calcium levels, magtatrabaho yung parathyroid hormone para pataasin ito. Dito naman po, kapag masyadong mataas yung calcium levels in our blood circulation, ang magtatrabaho ay yung calcitonin para ibaba pabalik sa normal yung blood calcium levels. Shown here are the gross anatomical illustrations and micro microscopic anatomy of the thyroid glands and also the parathyroid glands. On this slide, they're just giving us kind of like a visual representation or visual illustration on the different organs na maaaring maapektuhan ng thyroid hormone secretion. Again, thyroid hormone is quite important in the growth and development of humans. On this slide talks about some thyroid hormone disorders, specifically those that would affect a person's metabolism. Alright, so ayan po. Unahin natin itong column na to, which talks about hypothyroidism. Alright, so first up, in hypothyroidism, there is decreased metabolism. Mabagal or mababa daw po yung metabolism ng pasyente. So what would happen is if metabolysis is slow, what would happen is there would be weight gain. Alright? Weight gain and also mabilis daw pong mapagod or mag-experience ng fatigue yung pasyente. Alright? May different terms po ng hypothyroidism depending if the person is an adult or an infant. So if the person is an adult, hypothyroidism may be referred to as myxedema. Kapag naman po infant yung apektado ng hypothyroidism, this is referred to as cretinism. Alright? So both of these are cases of hypothyroidism. Parehas sila na decrease yung metabolism. Ang pinagkaiba lang naman po is yung age ng affected persons. Next is hyperthyroidism. So as we can assume, no, from the name, kabaliktaran niya yung hypothyroidism. So in hyperthyroidism, there is an increased metabolism. Mas mabilis daw mag-metabolize yung person in comparison to the amount of food that they are intaking. So ano nangyayari kung mas mabilis na naggastos yung energy, no? Compared to how fast you're intaking food materials or nutrients, what would happen is there is weight loss, all right? And some people may be given the appearance of nervousness, all right? So ang mangyayari po, for people with hyperthyroidism, they may develop what is known as the Graves' disease. Now, kalakip or kasama po ng Graves' disease is goiter, or yung nabanggit natin kanina na enlargement, no? Enlargement of the thyroid gland. Alright, so ayun po, here's a side-by-side comparison of hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. Para lang po, makompare nyo sila and makita nyo yung differences nila. That was for the thyroid gland. Let's now talk about the parathyroid gland. This one is also a bit easy to remember, no? So the parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone, or yun nabanggit natin kanina na PTH. Alright? So ang specific target tissues ng PTH are the bones and kidneys. Alright? So although magkaibang organs yung target nila, parehas lang naman po yung pakinabang or yung goal nila, which is to regulate blood calcium levels. Now, as you can see right here, more than calcitonin. So mas nagtatrabaho daw po ang parathyroid hormone sa pag-regulate ng calcium levels in comparison to calcitonin. So, kumbaga parang ang main character natin, ang main character po natin sa pag-regulate ng blood calcium levels is the parathyroid hormone. Tapos, kumbaga parang supporting role, no, or side character lang si calcitonin pagdating sa pag-regulate or pag-maintain ng calcium levels in the blood. Alright, so as you can see right here, if calcium ion levels is low sa blood circulation natin, the osteoclast would break down some of the bone matrix, and what would happen is there's also less calcium ions that would be lost in the urine. Ulitin natin, ang target tissues niya ay yung bones and kidneys. Alright? So kapag daw po mababa yung calcium levels, magtatrabaho si parathyroid hormone, uutusan niya yung osteoclast to break down some of the bones. Uutusan niya rin po si kidneys na i-reabsorb or wag itapon basta-basta yung calcium ions. So, hindi i-urinate ng pasyente yung calcium ions. Now, if we were to switch the scenario, kung babalik na rin po natin, if calcium ions are high, the osteoclast would stop or would not break down the bones. So, uutusan niya po yung bones na, or utusan niya yung osteoclast dun sa bones na wag munang mag-move ng calcium ions, wag munang mag-breakdown ng calcium ions dun sa bone para po ayun nga, we won't kind of like increase the amount of calcium ions sa blood circulation. At the same time, no, uutusan niya rin yung kidneys to excrete more calcium ions or to get rid of more of the calcium ions in the urine. So basically, uutusan ng parathyroid hormone yung kidneys na, okay, pwede mo nang itapon yung excess na calcium ions, pwede na itong i-urinate ng pasyente. Alright, so these are the mechanisms of action ng parathyroid hormone, depending if the calcium levels in the blood is low or high. And nakalagay din po dito kung anong ginagawa ng bones and ng kidneys. Alright, so this illustration just shows us everything that I explained earlier. Alright, so kung ano nangyayari sa bones and anong nangyayari sa kidneys in terms of balancing or maintaining the correct or the sufficient amounts of calcium in the blood. Next, let's move on to the adrenal glands. All right, the adrenal glands, they're located superior to the kidneys. All right, so kaya siya tinawag na adrenal. Ad, nasa ibabaw, renal, kidney. So nasa ibabaw siya ng kidney. It is superior to each of the kidney. All right, so each of the adrenal gland has an inner part known as the medulla and the outer part known as the cortex. Okay, ulitin po natin, may dalawang segment or may dalawang parts yung adrenal glands. Inside medulla, outside cortex. Okay? So, as we can see right here, the adrenal medulla and cortex would function as separate endocrine glands. Ulitin natin, iisang organ lang sila, no? Parehas sila na tinatawag na adrenal gland. But in terms of their function, no, separate or magkaiba daw po yung trabaho na ginagawa ng inside, which is the medulla, and the outside, which is the cortex. Again, sa last few slides po natin, no, lalong-lalo na if you belong to my laboratory classes, i-view nyo na lang po kung ano yung difference microscopically ng medulla and ng cortex. This illustration right here just shows us the gross anatomical location of the adrenal glands. Adrenal glands are on top of the kidneys. And ayun po, pinapakita rin dito sa atin yung appearance ng medulla and ng cortex. As we can see right here in this microscopic anatomy slide. Alright, so alamin na po natin anong mga hormones ang pinoproduce ng adrenal medulla. Again, na-highlight ko na po yung mga keywords na kailangan nating tandaan. First up is the epinephrine and the norepinephrine. Ito po ay mga hormones na pinoproduce in times of fight or flight response. Alright, so sa mga oras po, no, na we're in situations where we have to choose fight or flight, ang hormones daw po na pinoproduce ng adrenal medulla is the epinephrine and norepinephrine. So let's look at this illustration right here. So may step-by-step process daw po kung paano nagtatrabaho yung adrenal medullary secretions na pinoproduce ng adrenal glands. Alright, step 1, step 2, and step 3. All right. First up, stress, physical activity, and all of those similar things could stimulate the sympathetic division of our nervous system. So, piliin natin, no, halimbawa, magbigay tayo ng isang stressful situation. Halimbawa, you're scared of dogs. Imagine that you are afraid of stray dogs. Tapos naglalakad ka pa uwi, no, palabas ka ng school, tapos may nakasalubong ka na asong gala. All right. That would cause you stress. You may be scared. You may be very afraid of coming in contact with the stray dog, diba? So maipoprocess ito ng hypothalamus mo, tapos yung hypothalamus mo, kumbaga basically i-relay niya yung information sa adrenal medulla mo. Alright, so pagdating sa adrenal medulla, the adrenal medulla would now work to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. Alright, so ang mangyayari naman po dito sa step 3 is this would now prepare, no? It would prepare your body, it would prepare your muscles for increased physical activity. So kung halimbawa, mukhang rabid yung aso, mukhang mga-attack yung aso na kinakatakutan mo, yung epinephrine and norepinephrine would prepare you to run away. Alright? So yun po. That's kind of like a simplified explanation on how epinephrine and norepinephrine works. Again, ang epi and norepi is produced by the adrenal medulla in response to what was processed by the hypothalamus. So, adrenal medulla, yung pinag-usapan natin kanina, di ba? Let's now talk about the hormones that are produced by the adrenal cortex. First up is the aldosterone. Alright? So, ayan po. Isa sa mga bagay na kailangan nating tandaan is that this is a type of mineralocorticoid. Alright? So, again, mineralocorticoids are a type or is one of the different types of hormones. Now, under mineralocorticoids, meron tayong tinatawag na aldosterone. Now, ang specific organ na tinatarget ng aldosterone are the kidneys. So, let's look at its function. To regulate ion balance, it causes sodium and water to be retained, and it causes potassium to be secreted. Alright? I-simplify natin yung explanation na yon. Ulitin natin, ang adrenal cortex, nagpo-produce siya ng aldosterone. Ang aldosterone, kaya niyang kontrolin yung kidneys. Ang gagawin ng kidneys kapag na-influensyahan na siya ng aldosterone is that it would retain or reabsorb sodium and water. Kumbaga is, uutusan niya yung kidney na wag i-urinate yung sodium tsaka water. Pero uutusan niya rin yung kidney na yung potassium yung i-let go or yung potassium yung kumbaga i-excrete niya or i-secrete niya through urination. Alright? Another hormone that is produced by the adrenal cortex is cortisol. Ito naman, this is a type of glucocorticoid. Alright, so again, ulitin natin, no? Among the different types of hormones, we have what are known as glucocorticoids. Under glucocorticoids, we have what is known as cortisol. Alright, so ang target tissues niya is marami pong magkakaibang tissues in the body na tina-target ang cortisol. Tignan natin kung anong function. It increases the breakdown of fat and protein for energy purposes and reduces inflammatory immune responses. So, kumbaga parang dalawa yung pakinabang ng cortisol. First up, it would help us to break down fats and proteins and use them as an energy source. Now, if you remember our past discussion from basic biochemistry, ang primary and most easily utilized source of energy po natin is glucose, di ba? Glucose is the molecule that is, just to simplify, it's very easily converted into ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Now, pwede rin naman tayong makapag-acquire ng adenosine triphosphate from fats and proteins or from lipids and proteins, pero medyo mas mahirap po, medyo mas mahaba yung process ng pag-breakdown sa mga ito. So basically, tumutulong ang cortisol para magamit natin yung lipids and proteins for energy production. If, for example, medyo mababa yung intake ng glucose ng isang person. And ayun po, may kinalaman din ito or may tinutulong din ito for reducing inflammatory responses. Mas mapag-uusapan pa po natin yung inflammatory and immune responses pagdating na po natin sa lymphatic system. This one is a bit easy to understand. You could just read on this on your own. May step-by-step process din po, no, on how cortisol is secreted, as we can see right here. So again, no, yung hypothalamus po muna yung mag-uutos dun sa adrenal cortex para i-release yung cortisol. Alright, hindi pa rin po tayo tapos sa adrenal cortex, alright? So, again, right here is another hormone that could be released by the adrenal cortex. Next up are androgens, right? Androgens, they're also capable of targeting a lot of different tissues, and nag-iiba rin po ito for males and females. Now, for males, ang trabaho ng androgen is for secondary sexual characteristics. So, yung physical appearance daw po ng mga males, no, is attributed to the presence of androgens. Now, for females, iba naman ang trabaho nito. It kind of like contributes to the development of the sex drive of females. Alright, so again, ulitin natin, the adrenal cortex produces androgens. Magkaiba po ang function ng androgen for males and for females. Okay, so we're done with the adrenal cortex and medulla. Let's now proceed to the pancreas. All right, so the pancreas is also a member of our endocrine system. So, ayan po, tingnan natin yung mga highlighted portions dito sa slide na to. The pancreas is a mixed gland with an exocrine and endocrine portion. Ulitin natin, may dalawang, or may mga, how do we say this in simpler terms? Yung pancreas daw po, no, it's composed of different types of cells, and yung iba sa mga cell na yun ay exocrine yung trabaho, yung iba naman sa kanila ay endocrine yung trabaho. Alright, so the exocrine portion of the pancreas secretes digestive enzymes. Okay, so basically yung exocrine portion ng pancreas, mas mapag-uusapan pa po natin pagdating natin sa discussion on the digestive system. Next is the endocrine part. All right, so the endocrine part consists of what are known as pancreatic islets or the islets of Langerhans. Okay, ulitin natin, no? May dalawang parts or may dalawang types of cells ang pancreas, yung exocrine at endocrine. Ang exocrine tumutulong sa digestive system. Ang endocrine may tinatawag na islets of Langerhans. Now, within the pancreas, there are 3 different types of cells, all right? Alpha, beta, and delta cells. Okay, ulitin natin, sa pancreas, merong tatlong magkakaibang cells. Ang tatlong mga cells na to ay mahanap sa islets of Langerhans. Now, alpha cells, they secrete glucagon. The beta cells, they secrete insulin, and the delta cells secrete somatostatin. Okay, ulitin natin, no? May isang structure sa loob ng pancreas, tinatawag siyang islets of Langerhans. Yung islets of Langerhans, they're composed of 3 different cells. These 3 different cells also produce 3 different hormones. Alpha, glucagon; beta, insulin; delta, somatostatin. What do they have in common maliban sa located sila sa pancreas? They all work to regulate glucose levels. As you can see right here in this meme that I've included. Alright, so sana itong visual representation na to would help you remember, no, kung ano yung trabaho ng bawat cells. Alright, again, alpha cells would secrete glucagon, beta cells would secrete somatostatin, and the delta cells would secrete insulin. Pero lahat sila, ang trabaho nila is to control or regulate glucose levels. Okay, so again, this slide just shows us yung gross anatomical appearance ng pancreas, and dito naman sa slide na to pinapakita sa atin yung microscopic anatomy, no, ng pancreas. In this illustration right here, may differentiation sila kung alin yung alpha, beta, and delta cells. Pero dito po in actual microscopy, no, hindi na natin ma-differentiate kung anong itsura ng beta, alpha, and delta. Basta sigurado lang tayo, lahat sila ay makikita sa loob ng islets of Langerhans. And ayun nga po, huwag kakalimutan yung pinakita ko sa previous slide kung anong hormones ang pinoproduce ng alpha, beta, or delta. Hindi pa po tayo tapos sa pancreas. The pancreas also produces insulin. So listed here are all the target tissues. And let's look at the function of insulin. It regulates blood glucose levels. Alright? So ayan po, tumutulong din daw po yung insulin sa pag-regulate or pag-control ng blood glucose levels. Now, after a meal, pagkatas daw natin kumain, no, glucose levels are high. So, insulin would be secreted. Alright, ulitin natin, kapag na-detect ng body na mataas yung glucose levels, no, lalong-lalo na pagkatapos kumain, magsasecrete ito ng insulin. Now, the extra glucose is stored in the form of glycogen. Okay, so ulitin po natin yung process na yun, no? The pancreas produces insulin. Now, after eating, no, habang mataas pa yung glucose levels, insulin would be secreted. Ang trabaho ng insulin is to take some of the excess glucose or yung sobrang glucose na hindi natin magamit agad for energy, and it would be stored or converted to glycogen, which is a storage form of energy or storage form of glucose. So again, ito po ang trabaho ng insulin na nanggaling sa pancreas. Now let's talk about insulin abnormalities. We have what is known as diabetes mellitus. Alright? So kanina may nabanggit tayo, di ba? Na diabetes insipidus. Ulitin lang natin or rewind lang. Kapag sinabi na diabetes insipidus, ang problema is nasa antidiuretic hormone. Kinukulang sa antidiuretic hormone ang isang person kapag diabetes insipidus. Pero ang pinag-uusapan na natin sa slide na to is diabetes mellitus. Dito naman, there is too little insulin. Alright? Or there is something wrong with the insulin receptors. Okay? Ulitin natin itong statement na to. Ang problema daw po, kaya nagkakaroon ng diabetes mellitus ang mga pasyente is that either hindi sapat, no, kulang yung amount of insulin that is being produced, or maaari din naman po na tama naman yung amount of insulin pero nasa receptors yung problema, no? Hindi nagma-match yung receptors sa structure ng insulin, so hindi tuloy magamit ng pasyente yung insulin na pinoproduce ng pancreas. Right? So listed here are the symptoms of insulin. We have what is known as hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia. Mataas daw po yung glucose content sa blood circulation. Bakit? Hindi ma-convert sa storage form na glycogen kasi nga hindi makapagtrabaho yung insulin. Either sobrang konti nila or may problema sa receptor. Now, there are two types of diabetes mellitus, insulin-dependent and insulin-independent. So, as the name implies, kapag dependent, kailangan nang ini-inject na yung insulin dun sa person. Kapag sinabi naman na type 2 independent, these are usually found or these are usually observed among obese people. Now, for obese people, kaya pa naman pong gamutin, no? Or kaya pang, kumbaga is matigil yung type 2 diabetes mellitus nila with proper diet and exercise and lifestyle changes. Pero kapag po hindi talaga sumusunod yung pasyente sa diet, exercise, and other treatment options nung doktor, maaari po na lumala ito at maging type 1. Magiging insulin-dependent na yung pasyente. Alright? So again, naka-highlight na po dito, no, yung important keywords. Type 1, dependent. Type 2, independent. Hindi pa rin po tapos. Nasa pancreas pa rin po tayo. Next is glucagon. Alright? Target tissue ng glucagon is the liver. So, in between meals, glucose levels would drop. Alright? Kapag hindi daw tayo kumakain, no, mababa yung glucose levels within our blood circulation. Now, kapag na-detect ito ng katawan natin, glucagon would be secreted. Now, glucagon would allow glycogen to be broken down into glucose. Okay? Now, bakit ito patuloy na ginagawa ng katawan natin? Bakit patuloy na kailangan natin ng amounts of glucose within our circulation? Kahit naman po hindi tayo nag-exercise, hindi tayo nag-intense physical activity, gumagastos pa rin tayo ng glucose. Kasi 'di ba? We have our internal organs that are constantly working. We have our brain, which is one of the organs that has the highest expenditure of glucose. Magastos daw po sa glucose at sa energy ang brain natin. So kahit hindi tayo nag-intense physical activity, we need a constant supply of glucose within our bloodstream. So again, kapag na-detect daw po ng katawan na mababa yung glucose levels sa blood circulation natin, which usually happens, no, kapag yung periods of time na hindi tayo kumakain, glucagon would be secreted. Ang trabaho ng glucagon is to break down the glycogen, no? Sisirain niya yung structure ng glycogen and it would break down into glucose para magamit na ito or ma-convert na natin to for ATP. Alright, so again, that is the work of glucagon that is produced by the pancreas. This illustration shows us the regulation of blood glucose levels. So lahat po na na-discuss natin na mechanisms kanina, ito lang po in illustration form. So with regards to studying these illustrations, I would highly suggest po no, na maliban sa pinapanood niyo itong recorded discussion na to, also have a copy of your book near you. Para po kahit habang hindi ko pa nililipat yung slide or habang hindi ko pa po pinapakita yung next illustration, at least mapapakinggan niyo po yung sinasabi ko. Tapos dun sa copy nyo ng book, masusundan nyo na or kumbaga is parang matitignan nyo na po yung illustration kung anong dapat gawin or anong dapat mangyari or kung anong organs yung maaapektuhan. Alright, so wakas natapos din po tayo sa pancreas. Alright, let's now proceed to the testes, which biologically is only present for males, alright? So, pero kasama rin po no member din ng endocrine system ang testes. So, the testes is capable of producing testosterone, alright? Now, for males, for male people, for male humans, testosterone could target almost all tissues or a lot of different tissues. Now, it functions to help with sperm production and reproductive organ development and function. So, yung mga physical structures ng mga males, yung mga reproductive organs nila, they are developed, no? They are properly developed with the help of testosterone. And ayun nga po, sperm production is also successful with the help of testosterone. So again, testosterone is produced by the testes. Next are ovarian hormones. So as you can see right here, no, obviously, this is produced by females. Kasi females lang po biologically yung may ovaries. So the ovaries are capable of producing estrogen and progesterone. So for females, no, if the person is a female, it could also target a lot of different tissues. Now let's look at the function. It is involved in uterine and mammary gland development. So again, physical appearance ng females, it is attributed no through the work of estrogen and progesterone. And it is also involved in the menstrual cycle. Alright? So, nare-regulate yung menstruation ng mga females, patuloy na nangyayari yung menstruation ng mga females due to the presence and the work of estrogen and progesterone, which again, nanggagaling po ito sa ovaries. Next, we have what is known as the thymus gland. And again, this one is also quite easy to remember. The thymus gland produces thymosin, right? So this one would target tissues that are involved in our immune system. So again, mas mapag-uusapan pa natin to in greater detail once we talk about the lymphatic system. Right? So again, po, keywords lang din. Pag sinabing thymosin, it works with the immune system. Up next is the pineal gland. The pineal gland produces melatonin, all right? So the melatonin would target our hypothalamus and it controls circadian rhythms or yung sleep-wake cycle po ng mga tao, all right? Now, if you would observe, no, in the market, we have what are known as melatonin supplements, no, or yung mga pills or gummies that also contain melatonin. So, minsan po, kapag hindi sapat yung production ng pineal gland ng melatonin, nahihirapan yung mga tao na makatulog. Alright? So, they would have to take these supplements. Alright? Kasi yun nga po, melatonin affects our circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms or our sleep-wake cycle. Now, another important thing to note about this one is that light, no, ilaw, would affect its function. So, nakaka-apekto daw po yung exposure natin to light with the function and production of melatonin. Paano po ito nangyayari? Ano nangyayari dito? When we are exposed to light or kahit po yung light lang, yung ilaw na nanggagaling sa laptops natin, televisions, our cell phones or gadgets, no? it kind of like tricks our brain into thinking na araw pa. Okay? Again, ulitin natin kahit gabi na. Kapag nakakakita tayo ng light sources, it is tricking our brain into thinking that it is still daytime. So basically, hindi pa oras para matulog. Kahit oras na para matulog. So ang mangyayari, bababa yung melatonin production, which is not good. We need melatonin, especially at night, para po makatulog tayo ng maayos. So ayun po. Isa rin sa mga common advice for people who have difficulty sleeping is to avoid using their gadgets a few minutes or hours before going to sleep. Kasi nga, maapektuhan yung melatonin production and maapektuhan din yung sleep-wake cycle natin or masisira yung circadian rhythm natin. Alright, so ulitin natin, melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. It controls our circadian rhythms, and this may be disrupted by constant exposure to light or yung visually no na nakakakita tayo ng ilaw. That ends our discussion on the endocrine system. Pero may mga susunod na slides pa po, no? These next few slides are the slides that I have collated, yung mga slides na inipon ko po that contains microscopic anatomy. So, tignan natin yung mga nabanggit na tissues kanina and how they look like in with regards no, to their microscopic appearance. Alright, so again, I was the person who compiled or collated all of these different tissue samples. Alright, so I kind of like browsed through the internet para po makahanap no, ng mga good examples or best examples of photos to represent the different tissues that we've talked about at the earlier part of this discussion, and para po mag-guide na rin kayo into identifying the different parts of these tissues. Or ayun nga po, para matulungan kayo makapag-aral ng microscopic anatomy. This is specifically important if you belong to my laboratory classes. All right, so let's proceed with the tissues that we need to study for the endocrine system. All right, so as you can see right here, this is kind of like just a general slide which shows us kung nasaan yung hypothalamus, kung nasaan yung anterior pituitary gland, and kung nasaan yung posterior pituitary gland. Notice that the anterior pituitary is darker in comparison to the posterior pituitary. Now, with regards to the hormones that they're capable of producing, rewind na lang po no, dun sa previous discussion natin, dun sa slides na nadaanan natin earlier. But again, here's just a visual representation kung nasaan yung hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and posterior pituitary. Again, kapag dark, anterior, kapag light, posterior. Next, ayan po, again, no, this is just kind of like a zoomed in photo kung nasan yung adenohypophysis and neurohypophysis natin, or yung anterior pituitary versus the posterior pituitary gland. This is most likely a high power objective view na po. Alright? So notice, no, mas naka-zoom in na tayo. Again, this is probably the pituitary gland at the high power objective view. So again, here is the anterior pituitary or the adenohypophysis, and right here is the neurohypophysis or the posterior pituitary. Alright, so nag-i-include lang po ako ng iba-ibang pictures at different objectives para po ma-familiarize kayo kung anong itsura nila, kung scanner lang, kung high power, or kung oil immersion ba. Para po kahit anong picture yung maipakita sa inyo sa mga darating natin na, let's say, practicals or major exams, at least po, no, alam nyo na, or parang kumbaga is trained na, no? Trained na po yung mga mata nyo sa kung anong dapat nating makita, kung anong dapat nating ma-identify. Again, the darker staining areas is the anterior pituitary, otherwise referred to as the adenohypophysis. The lighter staining areas is the posterior pituitary, otherwise referred to as the neurohypophysis. Alright, so again, this is just a focused view on the anterior pituitary. So ayan po, nakalagay na rin dito yung different types of cells that we may be able to see, like acidophils or basophils. Next, ayan po, we have a zoomed in view of the posterior pituitary. So dito po, we have what are known as pituitocytes and herring bodies. Dito po sa discussion natin, hindi natin napag-usapan, no, kung ano yung specific functions ng pituitocytes and herring bodies. But if you would check your book or click on the references na sinend ko po sa inyo, if you belong to my laboratory classes, no, you may be able to find, no, the specific discussion and functions of these cells right here. Alright, next, the thyroid and parathyroid glands. Ito po, pinapakita lang sa atin anong itsura ng thyroid gland in comparison to the parathyroid gland. Alright, here is kind of like a high-power objective view of the thyroid gland. In the middle, we have what is known as the colloid. Right here, we're seeing the parafollicular cells and the follicular cells. So again, rewind na lang po sa discussion natin earlier para po maaral nyo kung ano yung mga hormones na pinoproduce ng follicular versus parafollicular cells. Alright, next is the parathyroid gland. This is most likely, kung hindi high power objective, most likely a oil immersion objective view ng parathyroid gland. So we have what are known as chief cells and the oxyphil cells. Again, you may check, no, yung references po na shinare ko, yung PDF copy nito, i-click nyo yung links and then read on the functions of these cells. Next is the pineal gland. So, ayan po. Ito, may descriptions naman po. Nandito yung pinealocytes, nandito yung interstitial glial cells. So, again, just study the descriptions that come with the photos. Next is the thymus. Alright? So, again, ang thymus po, no, meron din siyang tinatawag na cortex and medulla. So, be familiar, no, dun sa mga areas na tinatawag nating cortex and medulla. So, usually naman po, no, medulla is in the middle, alright, or on the inside, and the cortex is on the outside. Alright? Ulitin po natin. Inside, medulla, outside, cortex. Alright? Medulla, middle. Alright, this is just kind of like either a high power or oil immersion view of the thymus, cortex, and medulla. So, para lang makita natin yung differences nila in terms of staining and the cells that we may be able to observe. Next is the adrenal gland. Ang adrenal gland po ay meron ding cortex and medulla. Pero same din naman po yung concept, no? Cortex outside, medulla inside, or medulla middle. Alright, so this is just kind of like a zoomed in view, maybe like a low power objective view of the adrenal cortex. So as you can see right here, the adrenal cortex actually has 3 different zones. So zone number 1, zona glomerulosa. Zone number 2, zona fasciculata. Zone number 3 is zona reticularis. Lahat naman po ito ay bahagi ng adrenal cortex. Alright? Pero magkakaiba po na zones may also be identified, no, in the adrenal cortex. Depending on their location or proximity to the medulla, mas malapit sa medulla, no, is the zona reticularis. Yung pinakamalayo or nasa pinakalabas is the zona glomerulosa. And yung nasa gitna nun is the zona fasciculata. Again, lahat ng ito ay adrenal cortex pa rin. And right here, we have a kind of like oil immersion objective view of the adrenal medulla. So also shown here or pointed here are the different cells or structures that we may be able to find sa adrenal medulla. Next is the pancreas. So ayun po, nakikita natin that there are areas that are endocrine in function and exocrine in function. Alright, so yung endocrine cells, yun po yung mga na-discuss natin kanina. Yung exocrine cells, mas mapag-uusapan pa natin sa digestive system. Alright, this is just a different view of the pancreas with ducts, as we can see right here. All right, so that was all of our microscopic anatomy slides for the endocrine system. That's it for the discussion. Thank you so much for listening.